In the blink of an eye, roster cuts will be here. We still need to go through training camp, the preseason, and all that, but it's never too early to start talking about who could be a surprise cut within the Cowboys when the day comes. Ladies and gentlemen, today I've got 3 players for y'all. Let's get to this. Here we go. What is up, everyone, and welcome into A to Z Sports Dallas Primetime, usually streaming with you live Sunday and Thursday night at 8 p.m. Central. Currently, there will be no live shows as I am on vacation, but right now, though, we have a quick hitting video discussing some surprise cut candidates. And listen, man, this all started because over on the website side of things on ADZsports.com, which, by the way, you can check out for all your NFL needs, ADZsports.com/Dallas for Cowboys content. Mike Payton, who was here on the show a week ago, is putting together an article as we speak about surprise cut candidates for every team in the NFL. That got my head spinning a little bit this morning, and I said, you know what? Got to take this to my guys over on Primetime, right? We got to discuss it with the Primetime audience. Ladies and gentlemen, do me a favor and let me know in the chat right now, in the comments. Let me know, who do you think is a surprise cut candidate on the Cowboys heading into training camp? And the first name that came to mind, you already see him in the graphic. You saw him on the thumbnail. For those of you listening to the podcast, because we have a podcast, it's still a mystery for you. But I won't keep you wondering any longer. My number one surprise cut candidate is one that I hate to include on this list, but it's running back Deuce Vaughn. He's got to be on the list. Now, a couple of disclaimers. Number one, Deuce Vaughn is on my 53-man roster projection. So as of today, I believe he will make the roster. But boy, do I think he's got to fight for his spot. I think it is not a lock that Deuce Vaughn is on the 53 when the season starts. Disclaimer number 2, I don't think there's a player I'm rooting for the most to make the team in terms of those guys that are on the roster bubble, because I'm all for the Deuce Vaughn project, man. I want to see Deuce Vaughn step it up in 2024, and I want to see him involved with the offense in all sorts of ways. The Cowboys have been working out Deuce as a wide receiver in certain practices. I want to see that work. I want to see him earn a role in kickoff return. I want to see him do this, do that. But I understand that it's a tough situation for him. First and foremost, Deuce is an outlier. And right from the get-go, he's an underdog just because of his size. Objectively, we got to start by that, right? As an athlete, even though he can bring so many things to the table, he is limited because of his size. Now, that size limits him in several ways. But the biggest one, especially for a guy like him trying to make the team as the number 3 running back, assuming that Rico Dowdle and Ezekiel Elliott are the top 2 guys, and Deuce is fighting the likes of Malik Davis, who isn't anything special, but is a more traditional athlete for the NFL. Then there's veteran Royce Freeman, who once was starting for an NFL team, didn't play out the way that we thought it was gonna, his career. But Royce Freeman is someone that comes in with at least some experience. But Deuce Vaughn trying to make the team as a number 3 back and him not being able to contribute on special teams is a problem, like beyond returning duties. And I'll talk more about that in a sec. But Deuce Vaughn not being able to go out there as a gunner or as and maybe you don't see a lot of running backs as gunners, right? But he cannot have some sort of job in tackling, in punt coverage, or in kickoff coverage, because he's small. You don't want him out there tackling in the open field. That is a problem. Now, additionally, his role on offense is somewhat limited as well, just based on the fact that you don't want him pass protecting. And as I've said multiple times on the show, a lot of people are like, just have him run routes or have him run the football. Don't ask him to pass protect. The problem is you got to ask him to pass protect, at least to some degree, because otherwise you become predictable. Because there's a lot of routes that running backs run that it's, first you got to check and then you release into your route, right? And if suddenly 100% of the times that Deuce is on the field, he's not a blocking, it becomes a problem that defenses can manipulate by blitzing whenever he's on the field, trying to overload the side of the running back. If you know he's not going to get involved, you know you're just going to beat the offensive line with numbers, and you're going to be in a nightmarish situation. So he does have to learn how to pass protect. And the encouraging part of this is that Deuce's struggles last year did not have a lot to do with his size. And Mike McCarthy back in 2023 was talking about how him being small naturally helped him to gain leverage, and maybe he can get involved in that way with pass pro. The problem is he was lost out there on the field when he was a rookie. Now, that was a bad thing then, was essentially benched because of those struggles, and wasn't a healthy scratch for the majority of the season because of it, for the most part, in my opinion, because that's when they essentially benched him, when he was struggling in pass pro. But that can be fixed. I would much rather see Deuce Vaughn as a rookie struggle because he's lost in what he should be doing versus him just being overwhelmed by the size of defensive linemen and linebackers. Now, the Cowboys are clearly trying to get him involved, right? Trying to get him those wide receiver reps, and that might work out for him. But also, I do wonder how much of that is the Cowboys being like, okay, purely as a running back, we're not so sure about Deuce, so let's see if he can do a little bit more, versus he's so exciting and we just got to give him the ball in any way possible. It can be any of those two. We'll see when training camp comes around, but I do believe he's genuinely in the roster bubble and has to have a strong training camp in order to stick around. Another positive for Deuce before we move on to the next player, though, which we're going to discuss basically on a bundle, but I'll get to that. The kickoff rules that are about to begin in the NFL this season might incentivize teams, in my opinion, to have 2 players on the landing zone, which is the maximum you can have, by the way. But you can also have 1 in the landing zone, which is where kicking teams are going to be aiming for to avoid a touchback, because now a touchback is bad for you because you don't want the opponent starting out at the 30-yard line. So obviously, that is something you don't want to see. If the Cowboys want 2 returners out there, if John Fassel specifically wants that, KaVontae Turpin and Deuce Vaughn is a dangerous combo. Now, that might be enough in a play that is expected to become important and relevant once more. That could be huge for Deuce Vaughn. So there is that. Now, otherwise, the Cowboys already have a returner. So, for example, in punt return, I don't see Deuce being involved because the Cowboys already have KaVontae Turpin. So, let's see if the kickoff rule gives him points when training camp starts. Let's see what he's doing out there on the field and what the Cowboys are doing as they explore this new set of rules for kickoffs. But anyways, number 2 on the list, potential surprise cut, and I'm going to put these guys together. We're going with 2 defensive backs. I think there might be a lot of turmoil on the defensive back room, including cornerbacks and safeties. And one, it might be too much of a long shot, and I will admit, we just don't know anything about him at this point. But I'm going to add second-year cornerback Eric Scott Jr. Not because of anything related to his game, because I don't know anything about his game, because he was inactive all year long. There's been very few notes from him during OTAs, during minicamp. There's only so much he can do in spring practices. So I want to start off with this disclaimer. I don't think we know enough about Eric Scott Jr. to make an objective evaluation about where he's at in terms of the roster. So I'll lead off with that disclaimer, but I'll move on to this simple fact. The numbers game might get complicated at a cornerback. Your starting lineup is set in stone, right? It's Trevon Diggs, Dayron Bland, and then you've got Jordan Lewis in the nickel. After that, I think there's essentially one roster lock, which is Kalen Carson. 5th round rookie, the Cowboys. And Carson has been turning heads in practice. You're starting to hear that people are liking what they're seeing, that he's got some potential, that the coaching staff really appears to like him. So there's a lot of seeming support for Kalen Carson, and there is no way they're going to cut him as a rookie. There's just absolutely no way. Then you've got UFL signing Garyon Conley, who has NFL experience, who is a former first-round draft pick, and somebody that disappeared from the NFL after his rookie deal, But is there a scenario where Garyon Conley starts lighting it up in practice, starts staying healthy, because he had injury issues when he was in the league back then, hasn't played in the NFL since 2019, but did have a complete season over at the UFL. If Garyon Conley starts, making some noise, is there a world where the Cowboys are like, okay, man, let's try to get Eric Scott Jr. into the practice squad? Because I don't think the Cowboys want to cut him and just let him go into the world, right? If the Cowboys believe he can make it to the practice squad, though, could we see Eric Scott Jr. outside of the 53-man roster? Ideally, you don't want this because you want the young player to stand out, right? But, man, I just think the numbers game could get hypothetically complicated if the Cowboys are aiming to get 5 cornerbacks, and we'll see what they do at safety, of course, and then Garyon Conley they start to like, and then Ashawn Wright, maybe he fends off the efforts of some of the bottom of the depth chart guys as well, and suddenly you're in a complicated spot at corner. That being said, Scott Jr. also on my latest 53-man roster projection, which, by the way, I will link in the description of this show over on the YouTube side of things. But anyways, moving on, final name on the list, Israel Mukuamu. I've talked about this a little bit on the show. Kind of hate where Mukuamu is at because I kind of put it on the Cowboys, honestly. I think that similarly to what happened with Byron Jones, Byron Jones was, I think the situation was saved later on during his stay in Dallas. But I think the Cowboys took too long to determine what they wanted to do with Mukuamu. Because I like chess pieces, I think we all do, but I do think that at the NFL level, for you to be this tweener hybrid type player where you're being asked to play safety and then cornerback and then safety again, you've got to be a top tier athlete or just a freaking genius, right? And I think the Cowboys should have determined Mukuamu's position earlier in his career, and I do think they hurt him a little bit. So now, according to Nick Harris, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit from the official DallasCowboys.com website, now Eric Scott Jr. is getting reps with the first team and the second team, and so is Wright and Carson and a lot of players. But Mukuamu, according to Nick Harris, and again, paraphrasing, is working mostly with the reserve team. I don't think he had snaps with the first team during spring practice, and that might be telling. This might be, and again, Nick Harris does say this is a prove-it year for Israel Mukuamu in training camp if he wants to make the team. Miki Spagnuolo also said something similar in the same article. It's a mailback article that's on the website for them. So I found that interesting. Because the thing with Mukuamu is, if he is going to make it as a safety, he's going to have to make it as the 5th safety. And he has a special teams contributions, so that might help him. But he's going to be buried in that depth chart behind the starters, Donovan Wilson, Malik Hooker, but also Juan J. Thomas, Marquise Bell. So either he makes it as a 5th safety or he has to make it as a cornerback. And he gets into that conversation that we were discussing earlier about fighting Eric Scott Jr. and Garyon Conley and all that. I think there's more room for him at a corner, but he's definitely a roster cut candidate. And Mukuamu was not on my my latest 53-man roster projection for what it's worth. Let me know in the comments, what do you think? Who could be a surprise, and keyword surprise, by the way, who's a surprise cut candidate for the Cowboys in 2024. Looking forward to seeing all of your answers, and I'll see you again on the next video. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.